In this video, we are going to cover how to plan nutrition for a 24-hour running race, how I make my homemade gels, what it looks like in real life, and how it actually went in a race. I begin with the science and the theory, and the science suggests anywhere between 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour is optimal. There's some that even suggest higher levels, even all the way out to 120 grams. And there seems to be a correlation that the more you can take in, the better your performance. Just because the theory says it's optimal, well, it doesn't mean you can actually do it. And the amount that you can take in and process while running, well, that can be a limiter. During my training, I experimented with different amounts of intake and different types of food. I was aiming to see what I could handle, what types of food agreed with me, what didn't, and also hoped to train my gut to be able to handle more. Based on all this, I settled on aiming between 70 to 80 grams per hour of carbohydrate as my intake, and 80 grams, that really was on my limit. Anything beyond there, I really struggled to process, and it just sort of sat really high and didn't, well, I felt like rubbish. I also knew that if needed, I could drop below the 70 grams per hour. For my homemade gels, I wanted to take advantage of glucose and fructose mixes. Now there's different transporters of the different types of sugar out of the gut. Using a combination, take advantage of that. If we were just thinking about glucose, the limiting rate seems to be about 60 grams per hour. If we add fructose to the mixture, we can add an extra 30 grams, but it may even be more beyond that. However, not everyone can handle fructose. I use a mixture of maltodextrin that I get from bulk nutrients, and that's a long chain version of carbohydrates, which breaks down to glucose and white sugar. It's called table sugar, also known as sucrose. Now the sucrose is made up of two carbohydrate molecules. One is glucose and the other one is fructose. Now there's optimal ratios of glucose and fructose, the initials saying 2 to 1, other companies have used different ratios of more fructose, even less. One thing I do find is if I put in too much of the fructose by means of using the table sugar, the gels are way too sweet and very hard to pellet. So I've settled on, after experimentation, 1-to-1 mix of maltodextrin and table sugar. In my flasks, I'm going to put in 100 grams of carbohydrate total, and that is made up of 50 grams of maltodextrin, 50 grams of table sugar. I'll boil up the kettle, let it sit for a little bit, have a bit below boiling water. I'll mix that in a jar, just make a bit of a paste, and then I tip that into my flasks. And I know that for every flask that I have, there's 100 grams. If there's a little bit of space left in the flask, then I top it up with just a little bit of extra water. And by the time it sits overnight and is ready for the next day, it's just one nice fluid gel mix and is a whole lot cheaper than most manufactured gels. Just having a mixture of maltodextrin and table sugar for 24 hours, that was never quite going to work. I know my gut wasn't going to handle it. So for the race, I was mixing it up with the homemade gel, Morton gels, some Cliff bars, jelly beans, 2 or 3 Red Bulls for the race, and a sports drink, bulk nutrients, Sports Fuel 101. Got a laminator, filled up a spreadsheet, and I planned it all out, added some colour coding, had a few columns of how much I was taking in every 30 minutes, every hour, and in 4-hour blocks. That way, everything was predetermined what I was going to take, and knowing what was in each serve of food that I had, and that comes down to sorting out the serves ahead of time. If I needed to make adjustments on the fly during the race, they were easy to be done. And during the race, my nutrition went quite well for the first 12 hours. I stuck very closely to the plan. There wasn't really much variation. My guts weren't unsettled. The only thing I did notice is that when I had the Cliff Bar, I felt heavier and slower for maybe the next half hour or so. It seems to be. I lost a bit of the energy for running, which particularly showed up around 10 hours in. I seem to have solved that with drinking just a little bit more water and staying away from the sports drink. It just seemed to get everything back on track at that time. But the trouble that I ended up having was when I got really cold. And my problems with the rain and temperature regulation was covered in my race recap video. But once I got really cold, my gut seemed to really shut down and I wasn't able to take in 70 plus grams of carbohydrate each hour. So what I did instead is I started having half serves. That seemed to work and that allowed my body to, I guess, process the food a little bit better. Also, when I had to warm up and I took those stints off the track in my car with the heater, I ate a bit of food then, knowing that I wasn't going to be running and hopefully my body could process the food. So I had some Cliff Bars, I had a couple of bagels, which was backup food there, and I even had some salt and vinegar chips. That seemed to do the trick. Over the first 12 hours of the race, I averaged 73 grams of carbohydrate per hour. After that, I was taking in 58 grams per hour. I didn't ever feel like I didn't have the fuel or the energy to keep running. Nutrition went quite smoothly, and I put that down to the fact not only did I plan it, but those plans were based on weeks of experimenting and trying to train my gut to handle the amount of food that I took in during the race. Experiment, keep track, have a good understanding of the theory as your starting point. As always, any questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer. In the meantime, keep on running, runners.